Greetings, and welcome back to Room 303 and our talks with Walt as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem in drum taps, As Toilsome I Wandered Virginia's Woods. This is poem 18 of the drum tap section. And as we've been commenting, all of these poems are the most difficult, challenging to experience read in Leaves of Grass. I know that some readers of Leaves of Grass will make it to this part of Leaves of Grass and then they just set it down and they never pick it up. I was recently actually told this by one of you guys who had been reading Leaves of Grass many years ago and said out loud in writing, you know, I read Leaves of Grass years ago and I got all the way to the drum tap section. I got halfway through and I had to finish. And I knew what she was talking about. It was some of these very poems that we're now going through. I just want to remind you that in the poem To Thee Old Cause at the very beginning of Leaves of Grass, Whitman said, "My book and the war are one." And I think it's such an important line, and here we will see why this line is so vital. Now, our assumptions are that you have been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, that you've been annotating your own personal copy, I hope, of Leaves of Grass. We worked with everything from inscriptions, and every line from that very first word come all the way up through and including a set of introductory comments for drum taps, and we just did a site in Camp at Daybreak. Our Nortons will tell us about this poem, that it remained unchanged in drum taps through all editions. Characteristically, as in many other poems of this group, the sense of direct experience is strongly invoked. And there is, in fact, a real debate about if this poem was, the genesis of this poem is Whitman's closest visit to the front in his search for his brother George in the fall of 1862 in Falmouth, Virginia. He was there. It is altogether possible that he actually witnessed what it is that he will describe here. As toilsome I wandered Virginia's woods. As toilsome I wandered Virginia's woods, to the music of rustling leaves kicked up by my feet, for 'twas autumn. I marked at the foot of a tree the grave of a soldier. Mortally wounded he, and buried on the retreat, easily all could I understand, the halt of a midday hour, when up, no time to lose. Yet this sign left on a tablet scrawled and nailed on the tree by the grave, bold, cautious, true, and my loving comrade. Long, long I muse, then on my way go wandering, many a changeful season to follow, and many a scene of life, yet at times, through changeful season and scene, abrupt, alone, or in the crowded street, comes before me the unknown soldier's grave, comes the inscription rude in Virginia's woods, bold, cautious, true, and my loving comrade. Now, the word toilsome is used in Pioneers, O Pioneers. Do you remember it? Was the road of late so toilsome? This idea of toilsome, I think, is a compelling word, obviously within the tradition of Dante and the journey through the underworld. No question we're going to have this idea of the journey of the Odyssey that will involve a certain kind of wandering, right? I mean, we're all together familiar with this idea, and I think Whitman's readers obviously would be very much as well relatable to this idea of wandering. And notice it is wandering through Virginia's woods. And then it's the second line, to the music, which is strange that that would be the way it gets used, of rustling leaves. And obviously the title of this whole collection is Leaves of Grass, kicked by my feet, for it was autumn, and the idea of the symbolism of it being the fall or autumn. And then we will first of all mark, then we will muse, sounding very much like Wordsworth's I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. I've given full lecture on it elsewhere, and obviously Pilgrim's Progress comes to mind here as well. That is to say, we've got literal and we've got symbolic happening simultaneously with the music of the leaves and this marking at the foot of a tree, the grave of a soldier. And now here we are again. And this will take us at 3A, no question, to Crane's Red Badge of Courage, and a similar scene that I think was Crane was inspired by this poem. Notice mortally wounded, and the syntax is interesting, right? Not he mortally wounded, but mortally wounded he, and buried, and then it's on the retreat, taking us, of course, back to an earlier poem in Vigil Strange, right, with this notion of the retreat. And then in parenthetics, easily all could I understand. In other words, walking through the woods, the music of the leaves at my feet, and I see this grave, this hastily made grave, and immediately I can see what's going on. Someone was mortally wounded and died, and then quickly buried beneath the tree. Now, I mean, it's significant that it's at the foot of a tree. I mean, remember what he says in Song of the Open Road? Why is it that sometimes I walk under a tree and I can't remember? It's like being around certain kinds of people. And I think these poems, especially in the center of Drum Taps, standing behind them is the expectation, the assumption, that we've read closely Song of the Open Road. And it's as if somehow we're going to readdress some of the issues of Song of the Open Road. And here it is with the tree. The grave of a soldier mortally wounded, he and buried on the retreat. Easily all could I understand. And then the halt of a midday hour, when up, notice, no time to lose, yet this sign left. In other words, there's three things that happen. One, obviously, in retreat, the soldier passes, probably wounded, and then, as we've already been exposed to, there are a whole lot of people. The worst thing that could happen to you in the Civil War, in the American Civil War, was not actually an immediate death. It was being wounded and then going through the horrific experience. And here the assumption is, and then there was that moment of, they paused for a moment, just enough time to be able to bury whoever, and then they had to go again. But there is a sign that gets left, and immediately Whitman's readers would understand, oh yes, Jesus Christ is crucified on a tree with a sign. Yes, okay, so there's certain kind of connections that are happening. And of course, the signs of Dante are ever present. I mean, Abandon Hope All Ye Who Enter Here is obviously the most famous sign, but there's all these signs, remember, that we talk about at learnstrong.net in our lectures on Divine Comedy and especially Inferno. Notice here, this sign left. Notice the use of the word this. The immediacy of this experience now. Left on a tablet, and then the word scrawled. Notice, not written, scrawled, hastily, kind of thrown together, right? Nailed on the tree. And again, obviously, the nailing on the tree is a very Christian and a very St. Augustine kind of reference, by the grave. And now, in italics, we got this interesting three words: bold, cautious, true. And then we've got my loving comrade. And as we've said, 12 times Conrad gets used. Camarero, of course, is the adaptation for Song of the Open Road. 12 times in Drum Taps it gets used. So here it is, my loving comrade. Just point out the paradoxes of bold and cautious. It's interesting. So it's like, okay, bold as in, let's go. Cautious as in, but then the word true, my loving comrade. These are the words that are selected to reference the one who has been buried. Then there's a break, and now sounding very much like any number of great poets, but I think of Wordsworth here, and I think the influence of Wordsworth on Whitman here is quite remarkable. Long after the fact, I mean, he says this, Wordsworth says this in Tintern Abbey, right? The way in which I'm able to come back to this moment at the River Wye and all of that in Tintern Abbey. We've given full lectures on it at learnstrong.net. Notice, long, and then the stacking of long. Long, I muse. Notice earlier it's I marked, now it's I muse. Notice it's music and muse. I muse, then on my way go wandering, right? And now the journey continues. Many a changeful season, we're from autumn to spring to summer, changeful season, to follow, and many a scene of life. This is one scene of many scenes, right? Yet at times, through changeful season and scene, abrupt, notice earlier it was halt, alone, or in the crowded street, go back to Song of Myself 48 and dropping letters in streets and leaving them where they lie. Comes before me. I told you the use of the word come through Leaves of Grass when we started with that very first word. I told you we'd come back to it again and again, no pun intended. Comes before me. In other words, it's like a movie projector, projecting it up onto a screen. It comes back into my mind's eye. The unknown soldier's grave, and obviously the grave of the unknown soldier is one that we celebrate in not only American culture, but in almost all cultures, because so many soldiers will fall and will end up in graves like this, and no one will ever know. No one will ever know, actually, in the end, where they ended up buried. Comes again the use of the word, the inscription, this use of the word rude. I told you guys, when he uses the word rude here, he doesn't mean like insulting rude. He means simple, right? Over-related to the earthy, to the simple. It's a rude sign. It's not like a magnificent sign. And here, obviously, we think of Thomas Gray's elegy in a country churchyard. In Virginia's woods. And then a repeat, obviously, bold, cautious, true, and my loving comrade. The poem is designed to remind us that we have to remember the sacrifices even of the unknown in wartime. I think this is what I mean when I call Leaves of Grass a sustained theodicy. I think this is the point that Whitman wrote this collection of poems, not just Drum Taps, but all of Leaves of Grass, to remind us that the only sin is to forget. We cannot forget how fragile democracy is and what it takes to create a democracy. We can't just throw it away so easily. We can't just use the language of, well, let's just burn it all down and start over. I think what Whitman wanted to be able to say was, before you go there, and before you start throwing out ideas like that, you might want to read my poem, as in Leaves of Grass, my collection of poems. I sometimes think of it as a whole bunch of lines of a single poem. The other, I think, message here is that art is always about remembering. What do you mean art? Well, the sign. Why write the sign? Why not just bury it? Why you got to put the sign there? That's the key. The words, right? To remind those who come after that this was my comrade, bold and cautious and true comrade. At 2b, obviously, the power of the paradox is remarkable. He's walking with music, and now all of a sudden he's got the sign. And then, of course, it's the compelling language of the sign that will stay with him long after the fact. Think about the power of that idea as it relates to the reading of all these poems. I mean, some of you have reported to me that you're being asked this. Why are you reading all of the poems of Leaves of Grass? You surely must have something better to do with your time. I mean, you must be awfully bored. To which the answer often will be, well, these poems are pointing me towards something. And I'm not always sure exactly how Whitman works, and I certainly can't. I think mystic is obviously a word that he likes to use. But somewhere beneath all these words, these signs are these pointers that lead us sooner or later to find ourselves in a crowded street, literally or metaphorically. And it hits us. A memory comes back to us of a set of lines. I mean, for some of you it's crossing Brooklyn Ferry. For others of you it's Song of the Open Road. For others of you it's Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking. For a good number of us it will be these poems of Drum Taps, and then of course When Lilacs Last in the Doyer Bloom, when we get there, and Memories of Lincoln here in a little bit. At 3a, how am I going to relate this to other texts that we're familiar with? I keep talking about Dante and wandering through the woods. I mean, just think about the way that poem begins, the Divine Comedy begins. I mentioned Gray's Elegy, written in a country churchyard. We've given full lecture on it at learnstrong.net. And then I've mentioned Cradle and Lilacs out of this collection because I think those two poems so well connect with this. Finally, at 3b, and how we will own a poem like this. I mean, there's just so many ways. I mean, there's things about what are the signs for you? What are, like, for example, right now, so you're basically halfway through Leaves of Grass. I mean, quite literally in your volume. When you pick it up, it's like right in the middle, right? What's the poem for you of all poems that is the sign? What's the one that you keep coming back to? It's like some of you will say it either haunts me, or it informs me, or it inspires me. But what is that? What is that poem? What is that set of lines for you? And then finally, who is your bold, cautious, true, and loving comrade? Like, who is that? And are you that for another, that they might say of you, wow, what a comrade? Thank you.